The sound of shattering glass echoed through the night air of Valentine, Nebraska, followed by a woman's scream that sent every dog in town into a howling frenzy. And Patricia Moore knew in that instant that her carefully constructed world was about to crumble into dust. It was the summer of 1882, and the daughter of Judge Harold Evans had just thrown a whiskey bottle through the front window of the Silver Spur Saloon, her silk dress torn at the shoulder, her carefully pinned hair falling in dark waves around her flushed face. The crowd that had gathered on the wooden boardwalk gasped collectively, their shock palpable in the humid evening air. Lilliana Evans, always so proper, always so composed, standing in the middle of Main Street with bare feet and wild eyes, looked nothing like the refined young woman who had graced every church social and town gathering for the past 20 years. "You tell my father," Lilliana shouted at no one in particular, her voice cracking with emotion, "that I will not marry Robert Cunningham. I will not be sold like cattle to the highest bidder, and I will not spend one more day pretending to be the perfect daughter he demands." The crowd murmured, shocked whispers spreading like wildfire. Judge Evans was the most powerful man in Cherry County. His word was law, and his daughter had just committed social suicide in front of half the town. Patricia Moore, the sheriff's wife, clutched her husband's arm, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and something that might have been admiration. Before anyone could respond, before the shock could fully settle, Lilliana turned and ran. Her bare feet slapped against the hard-packed dirt of Main Street as she fled toward the edge of town, toward the open prairie that stretched endlessly beneath the star-filled sky. Behind her, she could hear shouting, could hear her father's voice bellowing her name with a fury that made her run faster, her lungs burning with the effort. She did not know where she was going. She only knew she could not stay. The prairie grass was tall and wild beyond the last buildings of Valentine, and Lilliana plunged into it without hesitation, her torn dress catching on the rough vegetation, her feet stumbling over rocks and prairie dog holes she could not see in the darkness. She ran until her legs gave out, until she collapsed in a heap amid the grass, her body shaking with sobs that came from somewhere deep and primal within her chest. For 20 years, she had been the perfect daughter. She had worn the right dresses, said the right things, smiled at the right people. She had attended finishing school in Omaha, had learned to pour tea and discuss literature, and play the piano with delicate precision. She had done everything her father demanded, had molded herself into the image of respectable womanhood that society required. And then her father had announced her engagement to Robert Cunningham without even consulting her, had sold her future to a man 3 times her age who looked at her like she was a prize mare he had purchased at auction. Robert Cunningham, with his tobacco-stained teeth and wandering hands, with his 3 failed businesses and reputation for cruelty toward his hired hands. Her father had looked her in the eye that very evening and told her she would marry Robert in 3 weeks, and when she had protested, when she had dared to voice her own desires, he had struck her across the face with the back of his hand. That was when something inside Lilliana had broken. Or perhaps it had not broken at all. Perhaps it had finally, after 20 years of careful containment, been set free. She had walked out of her father's house with nothing but the clothes on her back. She had walked straight to the Silver Spur Saloon where Robert was drinking with his friends, bragging about his upcoming nuptials, and she had picked up his whiskey bottle and thrown it through the front window. The satisfaction had been immediate and intoxicating, even as she knew the consequences would be severe. Now, lying in the prairie grass with tears streaming down her face, Lilliana realized she had nowhere to go. She had no money, no possessions, no friends who would risk her father's wrath by helping her. In 1882 Nebraska, a woman alone was vulnerable in ways she had never fully understood from within the safety of her father's house. The night was warm, but the darkness was complete, and she had no idea what dangers might lurk in the tall grass around her. She must have fallen asleep eventually, exhausted by emotion and exertion, because when she opened her eyes, the sky was beginning to lighten with the gray-pink promise of dawn. Her body ached from lying on the hard ground, and her throat was parched with thirst. She sat up slowly, wincing at the pain in her feet, and looked around at the vast emptiness of the prairie. That was when she saw the horse. It stood perhaps 50 yards away, a beautiful paint gelding with a saddle and bridle, grazing peacefully on the prairie grass. And leaning against a rock outcropping, his hat pulled low over his eyes, was a man. Lilliana's heart began to pound. She scrambled to her feet, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she was, how disheveled and exposed. The man did not move, and for a moment she wondered if he was asleep. Then he pushed his hat back with one finger and looked directly at her. "Morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep but not unkind. "You looked like you needed the rest, so I figured I would keep watch." Lilliana stared at him, trying to make sense of his words. "You were watching me sleep." He stood, unfolding his tall frame with an easy grace, and Lilliana instinctively took a step back. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that fell to his collar. His clothes were worn but clean, the typical garb of a working cowboy, and his eyes were a startling blue-green that seemed to see right through her defensive posture. "I was making sure nothing else was watching you sleep," he corrected. "Prairie can be dangerous for a woman alone at night. Wolves, mostly, sometimes worse." The implication hung in the air between them, and Lilliana felt heat rise to her cheeks despite everything. "I did not ask for your protection." "No," he agreed, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You did not, but I gave it anyway. Name is Pierce Patterson. I work at the Double J Ranch about 10 miles north of here." "I know where the Double J is," Lilliana said stiffly. She knew she should thank him, but the words stuck in her throat, tangled up with pride and fear and the lingering shock of everything that had happened. Pierce studied her for a long moment, taking in her torn dress, her bare feet, her disheveled hair. His expression remained neutral, free of judgment. "I was in town last night, heard the commotion at the Silver Spur, saw you run." Lilliana's stomach clenched. "Then you know who I am." "I know who your father is," Pierce said carefully. "I am guessing that is part of why you are out here instead of in your nice, comfortable bed back in town." The kindness in his voice was almost worse than judgment would have been. Lilliana felt fresh tears prick at her eyes, and she turned away, unwilling to cry in front of this stranger. "I cannot go back," she whispered. "All right," Pierce said simply, as if this declaration of social ruin was nothing more than a statement about the weather. "Then where are you going?" "I do not know." The admission felt like defeat, like the final acknowledgement that she had acted without thinking, had thrown away everything without any plan for what came next. She heard movement behind her and tensed, but Pierce only walked past her toward his horse. He pulled a canteen from his saddle and held it out to her. "You are thirsty. Drink." Lilliana wanted to refuse on principle, wanted to maintain some shred of dignity, but her parched throat overruled her pride. She took the canteen and drank deeply, the water cool and sweet, the best thing she had ever tasted. When she finally lowered it, Pierce was watching her with those unsettling eyes. "Thank you," she managed. He nodded once. "The way I see it, you have a few choices. You can go back to town and face whatever is waiting for you there. You can try to make it on your own out here, which I do not recommend unless you have a sudden urge to die of exposure or worse. Or He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. "You can come with me to the Double J. The ranch owner, Mr. Jackson, he is always looking for help. You could work in the kitchen, earn your keep." Lilliana stared at him. "You would do that? Take me to your employer knowing who my father is, knowing what I did?" Pierce shrugged. "Your father does not own the Double J. And what you did last night took more courage than most people show in a lifetime. Seems to me you earned the right to make your own choices." The words hit Lilliana like a physical blow, unexpected and overwhelming in their simple acceptance. In her entire life, no one had ever suggested that her courage mattered, that her choices were her own to make. She looked at this cowboy with his worn clothes and easy manner, and something shifted inside her chest, some small seed of hope taking tentative root. "I do not even know how to properly cook," she admitted. "I can make tea and simple things, but nothing substantial. I have always had people to do that for me." "Then you will learn," Pierce said. "Rosita, she is the head cook at the ranch. She will teach you. It will be hard work, harder than anything you have done before, but it will be honest work. Your own work." Lilliana thought of her father's house, of the suffocating expectations and careful lies. She thought of Robert Cunningham's cold eyes and cruel smile. She thought of the life that had been planned for her, a life where she was nothing more than an ornament, a possession, a means to an end. "All right," she heard herself say. "I will come with you." Pierce's face broke into a genuine smile, and Lilliana was struck by how it transformed him, made him look younger and somehow more real than anyone she had known in her carefully curated social circle. "Good, but we should leave soon. Your father will have people looking for you, and I would rather not be around when they come through here." He was right, of course. Judge Evans would not take her defiance lightly. He would send men to find her, to drag her back, to force her into the marriage she had rejected. The thought made her stomach turn with anxiety, but also with a strange new feeling that might have been determination. Pierce led his horse over to where she stood and swung himself into the saddle with practiced ease. Then he held out his hand to her. "You will have to ride with me." "Hope that is all right." Lilliana looked at his outstretched hand, calloused and strong, and thought about all the rules she had already broken. Riding alone with a man, unchaperoned, pressed close together on a horse, would have been unthinkable just 24 hours ago. Now it seemed like the only logical choice. She placed her hand in his and let him pull her up behind him. The saddle was hard and uncomfortable beneath her, and she was acutely aware of how close she was to him, how she had to wrap her arms around his waist to keep from falling off. He smelled like leather and sage and clean sweat, a masculine scent that was entirely foreign to her experience. "Hold on," Pierce said, and then they were moving, the paint horse settling into an easy lope that carried them north across the prairie. They rode in silence for a long time, the sun rising higher in the cloudless sky, painting the grasslands in shades of gold and green. Lilliana had never been this far from Valentine, had certainly never traveled alone with a man, and she found herself acutely aware of every sensation. The movement of the horse beneath her, the warmth of Pierce's back against her chest, the endless expanse of sky overhead. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. "Can I ask you something?" Pierce said after they had been riding for perhaps an hour. "Yes," Lilliana said, though she tensed, expecting some inappropriate question about the previous night. "What do you want?" he asked. "Not what your father wants, not what society expects. What do you actually want from your life?" The question caught her completely off guard. No one had ever asked her that before. No one had ever suggested that what she wanted might matter. She was silent for a long moment, trying to articulate desires she had never been permitted to voice. "I want freedom," she finally said. I want to make my own choices, even if they are the wrong ones. I want to know that my life belongs to me, not to my father or a husband or society's expectations. I want to matter because of who I am, not because of who I was born to be. She felt Pierce nod, though he did not turn around. That is a good want, he said simply. Worth fighting for. The Double J Ranch appeared on the horizon around midday, a collection of buildings nestled in a shallow valley where Minnechajusa Creek provided year-round water. The main house was a sprawling structure of logs and rough-cut lumber, and surrounding it were bunkhouses, barns, corrals, and various outbuildings. Cattle dotted the hills in every direction, and Lilliana could see several riders working in the distance. Pierce rode straight up to the main house and dismounted, then helped Lilliana down. Her legs were shaky from the long ride, and her feet were in agony, cut and bruised from her flight through town. She tried not to show her discomfort, but Pierce noticed immediately. "You need to get those feet looked at," he said. "Wait here." He disappeared into the house, leaving Lilliana standing awkwardly in the yard, suddenly aware of how she must look with her torn dress and wild hair. She felt eyes on her and turned to see several cowboys standing near the barn, watching her with undisguised curiosity. She lifted her chin and met their gazes steadily, refusing to be ashamed. Pierce emerged from the house with an older man who could only be Mr. Jackson. He was perhaps 60, with iron-gray hair and a weathered face that spoke of decades spent working in the sun. His eyes were sharp and assessing as he looked at Lilliana, but not unkind. "Miss Evans," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Pierce tells me you are looking for work." Lilliana was surprised that Pierce had given her real name, but she supposed there was no point in lying. Her father's reach was long, and deception would only delay the inevitable confrontation. "Yes, sir. I can learn whatever you need me to do." Mr. Jackson studied her for a long moment, and Lilliana had the uncomfortable feeling that he could see right through her, could see all her fears and inadequacies laid bare. "Your father is not going to like this," he finally said. "No," Lilliana agreed. "He is not." "I do not need that kind of trouble on my ranch." Lilliana's heart sank. She had been foolish to hope, foolish to think that anyone would risk Judge Evans's wrath for her sake. She nodded stiffly. "I understand." "However," Mr. Jackson continued, and Lilliana's eyes snapped back to his face, "I am not in the habit of turning away people who want to work. You will stay in the house with Rosita and help her with cooking and cleaning. You will work hard and you will earn your keep. And when your father comes, as he surely will, you will make your own choice about what happens next. I will not hand you over, but I will not stand between you if you choose to go." "Fair." Lilliana felt tears prick at her eyes for what seemed like the 100th time that day. "More than fair." "Thank you, Mr. Jackson." He nodded once, already turning back toward the house. "Rosita," he bellowed, and a moment later a plump Mexican woman appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. "This is Miss Evans. She will be helping you. Get her cleaned up and show her what needs doing." Rosita's dark eyes swept over Lilliana, taking in every detail, and then she smiled warmly. "Come, child. You look like you have had a very long night. Let us get you fed and washed, and then we talk about work." Lilliana glanced at Pierce, who was watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything." He touched the brim of his hat in an old-fashioned gesture. "You are welcome, and Miss Evans, you did not fall from grace last night. You just stopped pretending to be someone you are not. There is no shame in that." Then he turned and led his horse toward the barn, leaving Lilliana staring after him with her heart doing strange things in her chest. The next few weeks passed in a blur of hard work and new experiences that left Lilliana exhausted every night but strangely satisfied. Rosita was a patient teacher, showing her how to make bread and stew, how to prepare large quantities of food for the hungry ranch hands, how to manage the enormous kitchen with its cast iron stove and seemingly endless supply of dirty dishes. Liliana's hands, which had always been soft and carefully tended, became rough and calloused. Her back ached from standing for hours, from carrying heavy pots and hauling water. But she learned quickly, driven by a determination to prove herself worthy of the chance she had been given. She also learned the rhythms of ranch life, the early mornings and late nights, the constant cycle of work that kept the operation running. The Cowboys came in for meals 3 times a day, a rowdy group of young men who teased each other mercilessly, but treated both Rosita and Liliana with unfailing courtesy. They were curious about her at first, this refined town girl who had shown up looking like she had been through a tornado. But they soon accepted her presence as they accepted everything else about ranch life, except for Pierce. Pierce was different. He did not tease like the others, did not engage in the rough banter that filled the dining room during meals. He was quiet and serious, always polite, always helpful. He carried water for her without being asked, fixed a wobbly table leg that had been driving her crazy, showed her how to properly bank the fire in the stove so it would last through the night. He treated her like a person, not like the judge's daughter or a curiosity or a fallen woman, and Liliana found herself drawn to him in ways that both thrilled and terrified her. She learned things about him in fragments, pieces of information gathered from overheard conversations and careful observation. He was 24 years old and had been working ranches since he was 14. He had family somewhere back east, but never spoke of them. He was the best horseman on the Double J, could rope and ride better than men twice his age. He saved most of his wages, though no one seemed to know what he was saving for. He read books in the evenings, which made him unusual among the ranch hands, and sometimes played a harmonica that made beautiful, melancholy music. He was also, Liliana could not help but notice, extremely handsome. Not in the refined, civilized way of the men she had known in town, but in a raw, elemental way that made her pulse quicken whenever he was near. She found herself watching him during meals, admiring the way he moved, the capable grace of his hands, the rare smile that lit up his face like sunrise. She knew she was being foolish. She was a woman whose reputation was already in tatters, and he was a cowboy who would likely move on to another ranch eventually, as all cowboys did. There could be nothing between them except perhaps friendship, and even that was complicated by the differences in their circumstances. But her heart, newly freed from the constraints that had bound it for so long, refused to listen to reason. 3 weeks after her arrival at the Double J, Judge Evans finally came. Liliana was in the kitchen kneading bread dough, her arms covered in flour up to her elbows, when she heard the commotion outside. Voices raised in anger, the sound of horses, and then her father's voice, booming and imperious, demanding to see his daughter. Her hands froze in the dough, her heart suddenly pounding so hard she felt dizzy. Rosita looked at her with sympathy and concern. "You do not have to go out there, child." Mr. Jackson, he said he would handle it. But Liliana knew she could not hide forever. This confrontation had been inevitable from the moment she threw that bottle through the saloon window. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked to the door, stepping out onto the porch with her head high despite the fear that churned in her stomach. Her father sat astride his large black horse, flanked by 2 deputies and Robert Cunningham himself. Judge Evans looked older than she remembered, his face red with anger and something that might have been worry. Robert looked smug and possessive, his eyes raking over her with an expression that made her skin crawl. "Lilliana," her father said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Get your things. You are coming home." "No," Lilliana said, and was pleased that her voice did not shake. "I am not." "You will do as I say," Judge Evans bellowed, his control slipping. "You are my daughter and you will obey me. This foolishness has gone on long enough. You have embarrassed me, embarrassed our family, and destroyed your reputation. The only way to salvage any of this is to proceed with the wedding as planned." "I will not marry him," Lilliana said, looking directly at Robert. "I would rather die than marry him." Robert's face darkened. "You ungrateful little wretch. Do you know what I have done for you? The money I have paid your father. You belong to me now, and you will honor the arrangement." The casual cruelty of his words, the assumption that she was property to be bought and sold, made rage bloom hot and bright in Liliana's chest. "I belong to myself," she said clearly, "and I choose to stay here." "You have no choice," her father said. "You are coming with me, willingly or otherwise." He started to dismount, and Liliana felt panic rise in her throat. But before her father's feet could touch the ground, Pierce appeared at her side, seemingly from nowhere, his hand resting casually on the gun at his hip. "The lady said no," Pierce said quietly, but there was steel in his voice that stopped Judge Evans mid-motion. "This is none of your concern, Cowboy," Robert snarled. "This is between a father and his wayward daughter." "I am making it my concern," Pierce said, his eyes never leaving Judge Evans. "Miss Evans is a guest of the Double J, working here with Mr. Jackson's permission. She does not want to leave, and she has every right to make that choice." "Rights?" Judge Evans laughed bitterly. "She is 20 years old and unmarried. She has no rights except what I grant her. Now stand aside before I have you arrested for interfering with the law." "On what charge?" Mr. Jackson's voice came from the barn, where he had been watching the confrontation. He walked over to stand beside Pierce, his weathered face impassive. "Last time I checked, it was not illegal to offer employment to someone who needs work. And Miss Evans is of legal age. She can make her own decisions." Judge Evans's face was now nearly purple with rage. "You are harboring a runaway. You are interfering with a legal marriage contract." "I can make your life very difficult, Jackson." "Possibly," Mr. Jackson agreed. "But I have been ranching in Cherry County for 30 years, and I know a thing or two about the law myself. There is no marriage contract without the bride's consent, and Miss Evans has made her lack of consent abundantly clear. As for harboring a runaway, she is an adult woman exercising her right to live where she pleases. You have no legal grounds to force her to leave." The standoff lasted for a long, tense moment. Liliana could feel Pierce beside her, solid and reassuring, and she drew strength from his presence. She had never had anyone stand up for her like this, had never imagined that anyone would risk her father's wrath on her behalf. Finally, Judge Evans seemed to deflate slightly, though his expression remained furious. "This is not over, Liliana. You think you can work in a kitchen and live like common folk, but you will tire of it soon enough. And when you come crawling back, begging for my forgiveness, I may not be inclined to grant it." "I will not come back," Liliana said steadily. "Ever." Her father stared at her for a long moment, and Liliana saw something flicker in his eyes that might have been pain or regret. But then his face hardened again. "Very well. If you choose to live in disgrace, that is your burden to bear, but do not expect me to acknowledge you. As far as I am concerned, you are no longer my daughter." The words should have hurt, and part of Liliana did feel a sharp pang of loss. But mostly she felt relief, as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She nodded once, accepting the terms of her freedom. Judge Evans yanked his horse around and spurred it back toward town, the deputies following. But Robert Cunningham remained for a moment longer, his eyes fixed on Lilliana with an expression of such malice that she instinctively stepped closer to Pierce. "This is not finished," Robert said softly, his words meant only for her ears. "You humiliated me in front of the entire town. That is not something I will forgive or forget." Then he too turned and rode away, leaving Lilliana shaking with a mixture of relief and dread. Pierce's hand touched her elbow gently. "Are you all right?" Lilliana realized she was crying, tears streaming silently down her face, though whether from fear or relief or grief she could not say. "I do not know," she admitted. "I just lost my father, my family, everything I grew up with, but I also feel free for the first time in my life. Is that wrong?" "No," Pierce said firmly. "That is not wrong at all. You chose yourself over their expectations. That takes more courage than most people ever show." Mr. Jackson cleared his throat. "Miss Evans, you are welcome to stay here as long as you like. And I will make sure word gets around that you are under my protection. Should keep most trouble away." "Thank you," Lilliana whispered. "I do not know how I can ever repay your kindness." "Work hard and be happy," Mr. Jackson said gruffly. "That is payment enough." He headed back toward the barn, leaving Lilliana and Pierce alone on the porch. "I should get back to work," Lilliana said, wiping at her tears. "The bread dough will be overproofed if I leave it much longer." But Pierce did not release her elbow, and when she looked up at him, she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "You did good," he said softly. "Standing up to him like that, I know it was not easy." "It would have been impossible without you," Lilliana said honestly. "Why did you help me? You could have stayed out of it, could have let them take me without getting involved." Pierce was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider his answer carefully. "That first night when I found you out on the prairie, you looked so lost but also so determined. Like you were standing on the edge of something terrifying but refusing to back down. I have been where you were, in my own way. I know what it is like to walk away from everything because staying would destroy you. And I guess I just wanted you to know that you did not have to face it alone." The simple honesty of his words moved Lilliana more than any flowery declaration could have. She found herself leaning into him slightly, drawn by his warmth and strength. "Thank you," she said again, inadequate though the words were. Pierce smiled, that rare, transformative smile that made her heart skip. "Any time, Miss Evans." "Lilliana," she corrected. "If we are going to be friends, you should call me Lilliana." "Friends," Pierce repeated, and something flickered in his eyes that suggested he was thinking of more than friendship. But all he said was, "All right then, Lilliana, and you should call me Pierce." She smiled through her tears. "All right then, Pierce." The summer days grew longer and hotter, and Lilliana settled into the rhythm of ranch life with surprising ease. She rose before dawn to help Resita prepare breakfast for the hands, spent her days cooking and cleaning and learning 100 small skills she had never needed in her father's house. She learned to identify different cuts of meat, to bake bread that came out perfectly golden, to make coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Her hands grew more calloused, and her body grew stronger from the constant physical work. She also learned about the ranch itself, about the complexities of running a cattle operation in the harsh Nebraska climate. She learned to recognize the different brands that marked ownership, to understand the economics of buying and selling livestock, to appreciate the skill required to work with animals and land in equal measure. Mr. Jackson, she discovered, was a fair employer who treated his workers well and expected honest labor in return. The ranch hands respected him deeply, and Lilliana came to respect him as well. But it was Pierce who occupied her thoughts more than anyone else. They fell into an easy friendship that grew deeper with each passing day. He would seek her out in the evenings after his work was done, and they would sit on the porch of the main house, talking about everything and nothing. He told her stories about his years working different ranches, about the places he had seen and the people he had met. She told him about her stifled childhood, about the books she had read that had given her glimpses of worlds beyond Valentine, about the dreams she was only beginning to articulate now that she had the freedom to dream. They talked about philosophy and religion, about politics and social reform, about the changing West and what it meant for people like them. Pierce had a sharp mind that belied his lack of formal education, and Lilliana found their conversations more stimulating than any she had experienced with the educated men of her father's social circle. He challenged her assumptions, made her think about things from perspectives she had never considered, and listened to her opinions with genuine interest. She found herself falling for him, slowly and inevitably, like a river flowing downhill. It was nothing like the romantic ideals she had read about in books. It was quieter and deeper, rooted in respect and genuine affection rather than dramatic passion. She loved the way he treated his horse with gentle patience, the way he helped the younger ranch hands without making them feel inadequate, the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed. She loved his quiet competence and his thoughtful silences, his rare smiles and his careful words. But she did not know if he felt the same way. He was always careful with her, maintaining a respectful distance even as their friendship deepened. She told herself it was because he was a gentleman, because he understood the complications of their situation. But part of her worried that he simply did not see her as anything more than a friend, a refugee he had taken pity on that night on the prairie. August arrived with brutal heat that baked the grasslands and made working in the kitchen almost unbearable. One particularly sweltering afternoon, when Resita had taken to her bed with a headache and Lilliana had finished her work early, she decided to walk down to the creek that ran behind the ranch buildings. She had discovered this spot weeks ago, a place where willows grew thick along the banks, and the water ran cool and clear over smooth stones. She had not intended to do more than sit in the shade and cool her feet in the water, but the heat was oppressive, and the creek looked so inviting. After glancing around to make sure she was alone, Lilliana removed her shoes and stockings, then hitched up her skirts and waded into the water. It was blissfully cold against her overheated skin, and she laughed with pure pleasure, spinning in the shallow current like a child. She did not hear Pierce approach until he spoke from the bank. "I hope I am not interrupting." Lilliana spun around, her heart leaping into her throat, and nearly lost her footing on the slippery stones. Pierce reached out instinctively, steadying her with a hand on her arm, and suddenly he was in the water with her, his boots and pants soaked, his face inches from hers. They stood frozen for a moment, the water flowing around their legs, their eyes locked. Lilliana could see gold flecks in his blue-green eyes, could feel the warmth of his hand through her sleeve, could smell the familiar scent of leather and sage that always clung to him. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "Sorry," Pierce said, his voice rough. "I should not have startled you." "It is all right," Lilliana managed, though her voice came out breathless and strange. "I was just cooling off. It is so hot today." "Yes," Pierce agreed, but he was not looking at the sun or the sky. He was looking at her with an intensity that made heat flood through her body, despite the cold water. His hand was still on her arm, and she realized his other hand had come up to cup her cheek, his calloused thumb brushing gently across her skin. "Lilliana," he said, her name a question and a prayer. She did not let him finish. She rose up on her toes and kissed him, her hands fisting in his shirt, pouring all her pent-up longing into that single act of courage. For a heartbeat he remained still, shocked, and she thought she had made a terrible mistake. But then his arms came around her, pulling her close, and he was kissing her back with a hunger that matched her own. The world narrowed to the taste of him, the feel of his mouth on hers, the strength of his arms holding her like she was precious and breakable. The water rushed around them, the sun beat down on their heads, but Lilliana was aware of nothing except Pierce, except the way he kissed her like she was air, and he had been drowning, like she was everything he had been looking for without knowing he was searching. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Pierce rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that since the first moment I saw you standing in that prairie grass," he admitted. "But I thought you were too far above me, too good for a cowboy with nothing to offer." Lilliana laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. "Too good for you? Pierce, you saved my life. You gave me a chance to be myself when the entire world wanted me to be someone else. You are the best man I have ever known." He pulled back slightly, his hands framing her face, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "I am not a man of pretty words," he said, "but I care for you, Lilliana, more than I have ever cared for anyone. You are brave and smart and beautiful, and every day I wake up grateful that I found you that night. I know I do not have much to offer. I am just a cowboy with some saved wages and a lot of dreams. But if you would consider it, if you think you might possibly feel the same way, I would be honored to court you properly." Tears spilled down Lilliana's cheeks, but they were happy tears, tears of relief and joy and overwhelming emotion. "I do feel the same way," she said. "I think I have been falling in love with you since that first morning, when you asked me what I wanted and actually cared about my answer. I do not need pretty words or grand gestures. I just need you, exactly as you are." Pierce's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds, brilliant and transforming. He kissed her again, softer this time, tender and sweet, a promise of all the kisses to come. "Fall into my life," he murmured against her lips. "Let me catch you every time for as long as you will have me." "Always," Lilliana whispered back. "I choose always." They stood in the creek until the shadows grew long, talking and kissing and making plans for a future that felt impossibly bright. Pierce told her about the land he had been saving to buy, a small ranch of his own where he could run his own cattle and build his own life. Lilliana told him about the school she wanted to start someday, a place where children could learn regardless of their social standing or their parents' wealth. They talked about the life they could build together, a partnership based on mutual respect and shared dreams. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, they walked back to the main house hand in hand. Rosita took one look at their faces and her own face split into a knowing smile. "Finally," she said in Spanish, shaking her head. "I was beginning to think you two would dance around each other forever." The next few months passed in a golden haze of happiness that Lilliana had never imagined possible. She and Pierce courted with the approval of Mr. Jackson and the good-natured teasing of the ranch hands. They took walks in the evening, went riding on her days off, sat together during meals and church services on Sunday. Pierce was always respectful, always careful of her reputation, but there was no hiding the love that blazed between them, obvious to anyone who saw them together. Lilliana continued to work in the kitchen and slowly became an integral part of the ranch operation. She discovered she had a head for numbers and began helping Mr. Jackson with the account books. She organized the household with quiet efficiency and earned the respect of everyone on the ranch through her hard work and genuine kindness. She was no longer the judge's daughter, no longer defined by her father's position or society's expectations. She was simply Lilliana, and that identity was more precious to her than any title could have been. In October, as the leaves turned gold and the air grew crisp with the promise of winter, Pierce proposed. They were sitting on a hill overlooking the ranch, watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of amber and crimson. He took her hand in his expression nervous but determined. "I know I should have asked your father's permission," he said. "I know that is the proper way to do things. But given the circumstances, I figure I should just ask you directly. Lilliana Evans, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I promise to love you and respect you and stand beside you for all the days of my life. I promise to catch you every time you fall and to never try to change who you are. I may not be able to give you the life of comfort you were born to, but I can give you freedom and partnership and all the love in my heart." Lilliana was crying again, but these were purely happy tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Pierce Patterson, I will marry you. I will build a life with you and face whatever comes together. And you are wrong about one thing. The life you are offering me is not less comfortable than the one I was born to. It is infinitely better because it is real and it is mine." They were married in November, in the small church in Valentine that Lilliana had attended all her life. It was a simple ceremony with no fancy decorations or elaborate festivities. Mr. Jackson gave her away, Resita stood up with her, and the ranch hands filled the pews alongside the townspeople who had come to witness the wedding. Judge Evans did not attend, nor did anyone from Lilliana's former social circle, but she found she did not mind. She was surrounded by people who loved and respected her for who she truly was, and that was worth more than all the society weddings in the world. Robert Cunningham also did not attend, which was a relief. Lilliana had not seen or heard from him since that confrontation at the ranch, and she hoped he had finally accepted that she would never be his. But as she stood at the altar with Pierce, promising to love and honor him for the rest of her days, she felt a small shiver of unease, as if somewhere in the shadows a threat still lurked. She pushed the thought aside, refusing to let fear mar this perfect day. Pierce slid a simple gold band onto her finger, and she did the same for him, their promises made before God and witnesses. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Pierce kissed her with gentle reverence, and Lilliana felt complete in a way she had never experienced before. They moved into a small cabin on the edge of the Double J property, a place that Mr. Jackson offered them at a reduced rent until they could save enough to buy their own land. It was modest but comfortable, with a good stove and a bed that Pierce had made himself from rough-hewn timber. Lilliana hung curtains she had sewn and arranged their few possessions with care, creating a home that was entirely theirs. The first winter of their marriage was hard but happy. The work never stopped, even in the coldest months, and Lilliana learned to manage a household on her own, without servants or help. She cooked and cleaned and mended clothes by lamplight in the evenings. She kept the fire burning and the cabin warm. She walked through snow to help Resita when the main house needed extra hands. Her body grew strong from the constant physical labor, and her spirit grew stronger still from the satisfaction of work well done. Pierce worked from dawn until well after dark, tending cattle in weather that was often brutal, fixing fences and machinery, doing all the endless tasks that ranch life demanded. But no matter how exhausted he was, he always came home to her with a smile, always had time to hold her and talk about their day, always made her feel cherished and valued. They made love in their small bed with a passion that grew deeper with familiarity, learning each other's bodies with reverent attention, finding joy and comfort in their physical union. They talked about their dreams during those long winter evenings. Pierce's plan to buy land was slowly becoming a reality. He had found a section along the Niobrara River that was available for homesteading, good grassland with water access and room to grow. They could file the claim in the spring, could start building their own ranch with their own hands. Lilliana added her savings to his, the small wages she had earned working for Mr. Jackson, and together they calculated how much they would need for materials and livestock. Lilliana also began teaching reading and arithmetic to some of the younger ranch hands in the evenings, men who had never had the opportunity for education. Word spread, and soon children from neighboring ranches were coming once a week for lessons. It was not the school she dreamed of, not yet, but it was a beginning, and she poured her energy into it with fierce dedication. Spring arrived with dramatic suddenness, the snow melting in rushing torrents, the prairie exploding into green life. Pierce filed the homestead claim and they began planning their ranch in earnest. Mr. Jackson gave Pierce time off to start building, and several of the ranch hands volunteered to help, a testament to the respect and affection they had earned. The ranch would be small at first, just a cabin and a barn and enough acreage to support a small herd, but it would be theirs, built with their own hands and their own sweat. Then, on a warm May morning when the world seemed full of promise and possibility, Robert Cunningham returned. Lilliana was hanging laundry behind the cabin, enjoying the sunshine and the fresh air, when she heard a horse approach. She turned, expecting to see Pierce or one of the ranch hands, and instead found herself face to face with the man she had hoped never to see again. Robert sat astride a large bay horse, his eyes cold and calculating as they raked over her. He looked older than she remembered, his face haggard, his clothes disheveled. There was a wildness about him that sent alarm bells ringing in her mind. "Hello, Lilliana," he said, his voice deceptively casual. "Or should I say Mrs. Patterson now? What are you doing here, Robert?" Lilliana kept her voice steady, refusing to show the fear that had her heart pounding. "I came to talk to you," he said, dismounting with unsteady movements that suggested he had been drinking. "To remind you of what you cost me. Do you know what happened after you humiliated me? My business partners backed out. The bank refused to extend my credit. People in town treated me like a joke, like I could not even control my own future wife. You destroyed me." "I did not destroy you," Lilliana said firmly. "You destroyed yourself with poor business decisions and worse behavior. I simply refused to be part of it." Robert's face twisted with rage. "You had no right to refuse. You were promised to me. Your father took my money and you were supposed to honor that agreement." "I am not property to be bought and sold," Lilliana said. "And I made my choice. I married a good man and I am happy. You need to leave, Robert, before my husband returns." "Your husband," Robert sneered. "That cowboy with nothing to his name. You gave up a comfortable life with me for poverty with him. You really are a fool." "I gave up a prison for freedom," Lilliana corrected. "Now leave, you are not welcome here." But Robert did not leave. Instead, he took a step toward her, his hand moving to the gun at his hip. "You are going to come with me. We are going to ride to the judge's house and you are going to tell him you made a mistake, that you want to honor the original arrangement. And then you are going to get that sham marriage annulled and marry me like you were supposed to." Fear spiked through Lilliana, sharp and cold, but anger burned even hotter. "I will do no such thing. Get off this property before I scream for help." "Scream all you want," Robert said, pulling the gun. "By the time anyone gets here, we will be long gone." He lunged for her, his hand grasping her arm with bruising force. Lilliana screamed, fighting him with everything she had, kicking and clawing and refusing to go quietly. But Robert was stronger, desperate and enraged, and he began dragging her toward his horse despite her struggles. Then, suddenly, Pierce was there, appearing from the direction of the barn with fury blazing in his eyes. He crashed into Robert with the force of a freight train, knocking him away from Lilliana and sending them both tumbling to the ground. The gun fell from Robert's hand and skittered across the dirt. "You all right?" Pierce called to Lilliana without taking his eyes off Robert. "Yes," Lilliana gasped, her arm aching where Robert had grabbed her but otherwise unharmed. Robert scrambled to his feet, lunging for the gun, but Pierce was faster. He kicked it away and threw a punch that connected solidly with Robert's jaw, sending the other man reeling backward. "You come near my wife again and I will kill you," Pierce said, his voice deadly calm. "Do you understand me?" Robert spat blood, his eyes wild. "She is mine. She was always supposed to be mine." "She belongs to herself," Pierce said, "and she chose me. Now get on your horse and ride away, and if you ever come back, I will not be so merciful." For a moment, Robert looked like he might attack again despite the danger. But then he seemed to collapse in on himself, all the rage draining away to leave only pathetic desperation. "I have nothing," he said brokenly. "She took everything from me." "You did that to yourself," Pierce said, though his voice had softened slightly. "Now go. Get help if you need it, but stay away from us." Robert stumbled to his horse and pulled himself into the saddle with visible effort. He looked at Lilliana one last time, and she saw something in his expression that might have been regret or grief. Then he turned and rode away, hunched over in the saddle like a man defeated by life itself. Pierce came to Lilliana immediately, his hands running over her arms and shoulders, checking for injuries. "Are you hurt? Did he harm you?" "I am fine," Lilliana assured him, though she was shaking with reaction. "Just frightened. Thank God you came when you did." "I saw him ride up from where I was working," Pierce said, pulling her into his arms and holding her tight. "I got here as fast as I could. He is not going to bother you again. I will make sure of it." Lilliana buried her face in his chest, breathing in his familiar scent, letting his solid presence calm her racing heart. "He looked so broken," she whispered. "Part of me almost felt sorry for him." "That is because you have a good heart," Pierce said, stroking her hair. "But feeling sorry for him does not mean you owe him anything. You made the right choice, Lilliana, for yourself and for us." "I know," Lilliana said. "I have never regretted my choice for a single moment." They stood together in the sunshine, holding each other, letting the fear and adrenaline gradually fade. Around them, the prairie stretched endlessly, beautiful and harsh and full of possibility. Lilliana thought about how far she had come from that night when she had thrown the bottle and run into the darkness. She had fallen from grace, in the eyes of her father and society, but she had been caught by something far more valuable. She had been caught by love and freedom, and the chance to build a life entirely her own. Robert Cunningham was never seen in Valentine again. Rumor said he had moved to Kansas City, that he had gotten work as a clerk, and was trying to rebuild his life. Lilliana hoped it was true, hoped he found some measure of peace. But mostly she focused on her own life, on the future she was building with Pierce. By summer, their cabin on the homestead was finished, a sturdy structure with real glass windows and a stone fireplace that Pierce had built with painstaking care. They moved in with their few belongings and their many dreams, and Lilliana felt like a queen surveying her domain. The land was beautiful, rolling hills covered in prairie grass, the Niobrara River winding through the property like a ribbon of silver. They had 50 head of cattle to start with, purchased with their combined savings, and a small loan from Mr. Jackson. It was not much, but it was theirs, every inch of it earned through their own hard work. Lilliana set up her small school in one corner of the main room, and children began coming regularly for lessons. Pierce built tables and benches, and Lilliana taught reading and writing, arithmetic and history. Everything she had learned in her own education plus practical skills that would serve these ranch children well. It was exhausting work, combined with all the labor of running the ranch and managing their household. But Lilliana had never been happier. She also discovered she was pregnant that summer, a realization that filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She had no mother to guide her, no female relatives to ask for advice. But Rosita came to visit regularly, bringing wisdom and practical help, and the neighboring ranch wives welcomed her into their circle, sharing their own experiences and offering support. Pierce was over the moon with excitement, already planning additions to the cabin to accommodate their growing family. He became even more protective, insisting Lilliana rest more and work less, though she laughingly told him she was pregnant, not fragile. Still, she appreciated his concern, appreciated the way he would sit with her in the evenings with his hand resting gently on her growing belly, talking to their unborn child about the ranch and the life they would build together. Their son was born in February of 1884, delivered with Rosita's help during a late winter snowstorm that left them snowed in for 3 days. It was a difficult birth, long and painful, and there were moments when Lilliana feared she would not survive it. But Pierce never left her side, holding her hand and whispering encouragement, and finally, their baby boy entered the world with a lusty cry that brought tears of joy to everyone present. They named him Samuel Pierce Patterson, and he was perfect. Dark hair like his mother, blue-green eyes like his father, and a temperament that seemed to swing between peaceful contentment and fierce determination. Lilliana fell in love with him instantly, this tiny person she and Pierce had created together, and she understood for the first time why her father might have wanted to protect her so fiercely, even if his methods had been wrong. Life settled into a new rhythm with Samuel. Lilliana taught in the mornings when the baby napped, worked on ranch accounts in the afternoons, and spent her evenings with her small family, marveling at the life they had built. Pierce expanded their herd gradually, reinvesting every penny of profit back into the ranch, and by the time Samuel was walking, they were on solid financial footing. Other children followed. A daughter named Rose 2 years after Samuel, then twins, a boy and girl named Daniel and Grace, born in 1888. Each pregnancy brought its own challenges, but Lilliana navigated them with growing confidence, supported by her husband and her community. The cabin grew with their family, sprouting additions, until it was a proper ranch house with separate bedrooms and a large kitchen where Lilliana could teach during the day and cook for her growing brood in the evenings. The school expanded as well. By 1890, there were nearly 20 children coming regularly for lessons, and Lilliana hired a young teacher from Omaha to help manage the growing enrollment. Her dream of a real school was becoming reality, and the county was considering making it an official institution with public funding. Lilliana threw herself into the effort, writing letters and attending meetings, using all the social skills her father had insisted she learn for purposes he never could have imagined. Pierce's ranch prospered. What had started as a homestead with 50 head of cattle grew into a successful operation running several hundred head. He hired 2 permanent hands to help with the work, young men who reminded Lilliana of Pierce when she had first met him, full of dreams and determination. Pierce treated them fairly and paid them well, and they repaid him with loyalty and hard work. On a warm summer evening in 1891, Lilliana sat on the porch of their house, watching her children play in the yard while Pierce worked nearby, fixing a section of fence. Samuel, now 7, was teaching his younger siblings how to rope a practice post, patient and encouraging despite their clumsy attempts. Rose, at 5, was determined to do everything her big brother could do, her face set in concentration as she twirled her rope. The twins, just 3, were more interested in chasing butterflies through the prairie grass. Lilliana rested her hand on her stomach, where their 5th child was already making its presence known with gentle flutters. She was 30 years old now, with calloused hands and sun-browned skin, with laugh lines around her eyes and silver threads beginning to show in her dark hair. She bore no resemblance to the pampered judge's daughter who had thrown that bottle through the saloon window all those years ago. She was glad. Pierce finished his work and came to sit beside her, pulling her close with an easy familiarity born of years together. "Tired?" he asked, kissing her temple. "A little," Lilliana admitted, "but happy. Are you happy, Pierce?" He looked at their children, at the land stretching out around them, at the house they had built with their own hands. Then he looked at her with those blue-green eyes that still made her heart skip after all these years. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," he said. "You know what I was thinking about today?" "What?" Lilliana asked, snuggling into his warmth. "That night I found you out on the prairie, looking so fierce and lost and brave. I remember thinking that you were either going to change your life or destroy yourself trying. I am glad it was the former. I am glad you were there to catch me," Lilliana said softly. "I think I would have tried to make it on my own, but I am not sure I would have succeeded. You gave me more than just a place to stay. You gave me the courage to believe I deserved happiness." Pierce tightened his arm around her. "We gave each other that. You changed my life just as much as I changed yours. Before you, I was just drifting, working one ranch after another with no real purpose beyond earning wages. You made me want more, want better. You made me believe I could build something permanent." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Samuel called out that he had successfully roped the post, and his siblings cheered. Rose demanded her turn, and soon they were all laughing and playing again, their joy infectious. "You ever think about your father?" Pierce asked quietly. "Wonder how he is?" Lilliana considered the question. She had not seen or heard from Judge Evans since her wedding day, though she knew from town gossip that he was still alive, still presiding over the court, still wielding his power over Cherry County. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I wonder if he is happy, if he ever regrets how things ended between us. But mostly I just feel sad for him. He could have had a relationship with his daughter, with his grandchildren, but he chose pride over love. That is a lonely choice." "His loss," Pierce said firmly. "Our children have everything they need right here." "Yes," Lilliana agreed, watching Samuel patiently untangle Rose's rope for the 3rd time. "They do." The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Samuel grew into a serious, responsible young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Rose was bright and determined, announcing at age 10 that she intended to become a doctor, an ambition that Lilliana supported wholeheartedly, despite the raised eyebrows it generated. The twins were inseparable, completing each other's sentences and getting into cheerful mischief at every opportunity. The baby Lilliana had been carrying that summer evening turned out to be another boy, born in early 1892, and named Thomas after Pierce's father. And then, surprising them both, came one more daughter in 1894, a tiny red-haired girl they named Hope, because that was what she represented, the hope that family could be chosen and love could be unlimited. The school became official in 1893, with county funding and a proper schoolhouse built on land Lilliana donated from their ranch. She served on the school board and continued to teach part-time, her passion for education undiminished by the demands of her large family. She also became involved in other civic efforts, advocating for women's suffrage and better working conditions for ranch laborers, using her voice in ways that would have scandalized her father but made her children proud. Pierce's ranch continued to prosper, weathering droughts and harsh winters, market fluctuations, and all the challenges that came with ranching in Nebraska. He treated his land with respect and his animals with care, and his reputation for honest dealing spread throughout Cherry County. Men sought his advice and bankers trusted his word, and he built a legacy of integrity that his children would inherit. On a crisp October evening in 1900, Lilliana and Pierce sat on their porch once again, this time watching their oldest children ride in from checking the far pastures. Samuel was 18 now, a grown man in his own right, sitting his horse with the same easy grace his father had shown all those years ago. Rose was 16 and preparing to leave for medical school in Omaha, a pioneering young woman determined to break barriers and save lives. Where did the time go? Lilliana wondered aloud, feeling the weight of years and the lightness of joy in equal measure. It went into them, Pierce said, nodding toward their children. Into the ranch, into the school, into building something that will last beyond us. Lilliana took his hand, their fingers intertwining with the familiarity of decades. They both bore the marks of hard living, weathered skin and work-worn hands, bodies that ached from years of physical labor. But they also carried the satisfaction of a life well lived, of challenges met and overcome, of love that had deepened and matured like fine wine. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" Lilliana asked. "When I asked what you wanted from life?" Pierce thought for a moment, then smiled. "I said you were asking the wrong person if I remember right, but you told me what you wanted, freedom and choice and a life that belonged to you. And you helped me find all of that," Lilliana said, "but you never told me what you wanted." Pierce looked at their home, at their land, at their children, and the life they had built together over 18 years. "I wanted this," he said simply, "though I did not know it at the time. I wanted a place to belong, people to care for, a purpose beyond just surviving. I wanted a partner who saw me as an equal, who challenged me and supported me and made me want to be better. I wanted to build something lasting. And I got all of that the night I found you standing in that prairie grass, looking like you were ready to take on the entire world." "Fall into my life," you said, Lilliana remembered. "And I did. I fell and you caught me, and we built something neither of us could have created alone." "Best decision I ever made," Pierce said, pulling her close and kissing her with the passion that had never faded despite the years and challenges. "Asking you to fall into my life. Best decision I ever made was saying yes," Lilliana replied, kissing him back. They sat together as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, comfortable in their silence, secure in their love. Around them, the ranch settled into evening quiet, the soft sounds of horses and cattle, the distant laughter of their younger children playing one last game before bedtime. It was an ordinary evening, unremarkable in its details, but Lilliana recognized it for what it was: the fulfillment of every dream she had harbored that night when she ran from her father's house. She had fallen from grace in the eyes of society, had lost her family name and her privileged position. But she had been caught by something far more valuable: true love, honest work, and the freedom to shape her own destiny. She had built a life of meaning and purpose, had raised children who knew their own worth, had created a legacy that would outlast her. As they rose to go inside, Pierce paused and looked back at the prairie stretching endlessly into the darkness. "You know what is funny?" he said. "Your father wanted to protect you from this life. He thought marrying you to Cunningham would give you security and comfort, But look at what we built instead." Lilliana followed his gaze, seeing their land with fresh eyes. The solid house they had built with their own hands, the corrals filled with healthy livestock, the school building where children learned and grew, the garden where she grew vegetables for their table. Beyond the ranch structures, the prairie grass swayed in the evening breeze, wild and free and beautiful. "He wanted to give me security," Lilliana agreed. "But you gave me something better. You gave me freedom. And together, we created our own security, one that no one can take away because it is built on love and hard work rather than money and status." Pierce squeezed her hand. "Come on, Mrs. Patterson. Let us go inside and help put these children to bed. We have a full day tomorrow." "We always have a full day," Lilliana laughed, following him inside. The house was warm and bright with lamplight, filled with the cheerful chaos of a large family preparing for bed. The twins were arguing about something while Hope begged for one more story. Thomas was trying to sneak cookies from the kitchen, and Rose was already bent over her medical textbooks, studying with fierce concentration. Samuel came in from checking the barns one final time, reporting that all was secure for the night. Lilliana and Pierce moved through the familiar evening routines, helping the younger children wash up and change into night clothes, supervising teeth brushing and prayers, tucking small bodies into beds and kissing foreheads. They checked on Rose, reminding her not to study too late, and clapped Samuel on the shoulder as he headed to his own room, praising him for his good work that day. Finally, they retreated to their own bedroom, the place that was theirs alone, and helped each other out of their work-worn clothes. Pierce's hands were gentle as he unpinned Lilliana's hair, letting it fall in dark waves streaked with silver. She traced the lines on his face, the marks of laughter and worry and years spent in the sun. "I love you," she said simply, because after 18 years together, the words still mattered, still needed to be said. "I love you too," Pierce replied, pulling her close. "Now and always." They made love that night with the practiced ease of long familiarity, but also with tenderness and passion that had not dimmed with time. Afterward, they lay tangled together in their bed, listening to the sounds of the house settling, the soft breathing of their children in nearby rooms, the wind moving through the prairie grass outside their window. Lilliana thought about the girl she had been that night in 1882, desperate and terrified, running from everything she knew. That girl had been so afraid, so uncertain of her future. If she could go back and tell her younger self that everything would be all right, that running into the darkness would lead to happiness beyond measure, would she even believe it? Probably not. But then, that girl had needed to find her own way, had needed to fall and be caught and learn that she was stronger than anyone had ever given her credit for. "What are you thinking about?" Pierce asked sleepily, his arm tightening around her waist. "About how far we have come," Lilliana said. "About how that scared girl who ran into the prairie found everything she ever wanted because a cowboy decided to watch over her while she slept. That cowboy got lucky," Pierce murmured. "Found himself a woman worth building a life with." "We both got lucky," Lilliana corrected. "We found each other." She felt Pierce smile against her shoulder. "Fall into my life," he repeated softly. "I did," Lilliana whispered, "and I would do it again 1,000 times over." They drifted off to sleep together, secure in each other's arms, in the home they had built, in the life they had created against all odds. Outside, the Nebraska stars wheeled overhead, witnessing the quiet contentment of two people who had found what so many search for but few discover: true partnership, honest love, and the freedom to be exactly who they were meant to be. The story could have ended there, with that perfect moment of contentment and reflection. But life, as Lilliana had learned, does not stop for perfect moments. It continues forward, bringing new challenges and joys, new chapters in the ongoing story of a life well lived. In 1902, Judge Harold Evans died. Lilliana learned about it from the newspaper, saw the lengthy obituary praising his years of service to Cherry County, his dedication to justice, his contributions to the community. There was no mention of an estranged daughter, no acknowledgement that he had had any family at all beyond his position and power. Lilliana attended the funeral, though she stayed in the back of the church and left before the reception. She did not cry, but she felt a profound sadness for what might have been, for the relationship they never had, for the grandchildren he never knew. Pierce stood beside her throughout, a silent source of support, understanding that sometimes grief is complicated and closure is never complete. Her father had left everything to the town, establishing a fund for civic improvements and legal aid for the poor. It was, Lilliana supposed, his way of leaving a legacy when he had failed to create one through family. She donated some of her own money to the fund, anonymously, because she could afford to be generous in ways her father never could. Rose graduated from medical school in 1905, one of only a handful of women in her class, and returned to Cherry County to open a practice. She faced skepticism and prejudice from some, but she also found patients desperate for medical care who did not care about the gender of their doctor. Pierce and Lilliana helped her financially, and within a few years, she had established herself as a capable and caring physician. Samuel took over more and more of the ranch operations, as Pierce's body began to show the effects of decades of hard physical labor. But Pierce remained active and involved, unwilling to fully retire, taking joy in working alongside his son and teaching the younger children the skills they would need. The ranch had grown beyond anything he had imagined that night. He had saved enough for a homestead claim, and he took quiet pride in what they had accomplished. The younger children grew and found their own paths. The twins went to university, Daniel studying agriculture and Grace becoming a teacher like her mother. Thomas apprenticed with a veterinarian and returned to work with the ranch animals. Hope, the youngest, showed an artistic talent that Lilliana encouraged, sending her to study in Omaha, and then supporting her when she opened a studio in Valentine. The school that Lilliana had started in her cabin had become one of the best in the region, drawing students from all over Cherry County. She served as superintendent for many years, shaping curriculum and hiring teachers, fighting for better resources and equal opportunities for all children regardless of their background. It was not the life anyone would have predicted for the judge's daughter, but it was a life of profound impact and meaning. In 1910, on a warm summer evening much like that first evening in 1882, Lilliana and Pierce sat on their porch again. They were in their 50s now, their bodies showing the wear of years of hard work, but their minds were sharp and their love was as strong as ever. Their grandchildren played in the yard under Samuel's watchful eye, the next generation of Pattersons already making their mark on the ranch. "Do you ever regret it?" Pierce asked suddenly. "Giving up your comfortable life for this one?" Lilliana looked at him in surprise. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment. Why do you ask?" Pierce shrugged, looking slightly uncomfortable. "I was talking to Rose the other day, and she mentioned that she had done some research on your family. Found out that your father's estate was worth more than I will likely earn in my entire lifetime. And I just wondered if you ever thought about what your life might have been like if things had gone differently." Lilliana took his weathered hand in hers, this man who had shown her what real love looked like, who had stood beside her through every challenge and celebrated every triumph. "My life would have been smaller," she said honestly. Richer in material things, perhaps, but poorer in everything that actually matters. I would have had things, Pierce, but I would not have had purpose. I would not have had freedom. I would not have had you or our children or this life we built together. I would not trade any of that for all the money in the world. Pierce's eyes were suspiciously bright as he pulled her close. I am the luckiest man alive, he said gruffly. We are both lucky, Lilliana corrected. We found each other when we needed it most, and we built something beautiful together. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Around them, the ranch hummed with life and purpose, the legacy they would leave to their children and grandchildren. It was not a perfect life. There had been struggles and sorrows, disappointments and difficulties. But it was a good life, an honest life, a life built on love and hard work and the courage to choose their own path. Fall into my life, Pierce murmured, echoing the words he had said so many years ago. I did, Lilliana whispered back, resting her head on his shoulder. And it was the best decision I ever made. They remained there until the stars came out, two people who had fallen from grace and into something far better, who had built a life of meaning and purpose from nothing but love and determination. The prairie stretched endlessly around them, wild and beautiful and free, just as they had always been. As they finally rose to go inside, to join their family for the evening meal and all the small rituals of domestic life, Lilliana looked back one more time at the land they had claimed and tamed and loved. This was her legacy, not the social position she had been born to, but the life she had chosen and fought for and built with her own hands. She had been the judge's daughter once, constrained by expectations and trapped by circumstances. But now she was simply Lilliana Patterson, wife and mother and educator and rancher, a woman who had dared to choose freedom over security, love over comfort, authenticity over appearance. And she had found that in falling from grace, she had actually risen to something far greater. She took Pierce's hand and walked inside, into the warm glow of lamplight and the welcoming chaos of her large family, into the life she had built one choice at a time, one day at a time, one moment of courage at a time. It was more than enough. It was everything. The end came not with drama but with quiet contentment. Pierce and Lilliana lived into their 70s, watching their children build their own lives and their grandchildren grow. They remained partners until the end, still holding hands on the porch in the evenings, still sharing their dreams and their memories, still grateful for that night in 1882, when everything changed. When Pierce finally passed in 1922, surrounded by his family in the house he had built, his last words were for Lilliana. "Best life," he whispered, squeezing her hand weakly. "No regrets, no regrets," she agreed through her tears. "We did good, my love, we did real good." She lived 3 more years without him, staying active in the community and the school, spending time with her children and grandchildren, maintaining the ranch that had been their shared dream. And when her own time came, she faced it without fear, secure in the knowledge that she had lived fully and loved deeply and made a difference in the world. They buried her beside Pierce on a hill overlooking the ranch, beneath the endless Nebraska sky they had both loved so much. The headstone was simple: Lilliana Evans Patterson, 1862–1925. Beloved wife, mother, educator, and friend, she fell from grace and landed exactly where she belonged. And if you visit that hill today, you can still see the ranch house in the distance, still prospering under the care of Patterson descendants. You can still see the school building that bears Lilliana's name, still educating children more than a century after she taught her first lessons in a one-room cabin. And if you stand very quietly in the evening when the wind moves through the prairie grass, you can almost hear an echo of laughter, of love, of two people who dared to build their own happiness against all odds. They fell, they were caught, and they created something eternal. That is the best kind of love story there is.